Hey folks, and welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. So today, given we're halfway through the year at this point, which is a depressing thought in and of itself with how fast time is flying, I thought it would be a great time to just kind of reflect back on all the books that I've read this year, which has pretty much already exceeded 100, and think of on what I consider the best. Now, when I started doing that, I realized I have far too many picks, so I'm actually going to just do two videos. I'm going to do my favorite books and my favorite series for the year so far. And so this is essentially the first of a two-part video. So without further ado, I'm just going to dive into my list of my top 10 favorite books for this year so far. I'm not even going to attempt to rank these. They're all spectacular. I had a blast reading every single one of these picks. They're all worth checking out. So without further ado, number one, the most recent one I've read that makes the list is James Islington's The Will of the Many. This book is absolutely incredible. I was very skeptical of James Islington before I read his Lycanius trilogy, because I'm very hesitant whenever I see promoters hyping a book, but that series did live up to the hype, so I immediately dove into The Will of the Many the first chance I got, and it was a blast from start to finish. It's what at this point I kind of consider trademark James Islington in his ability to take classic fantasy tropes, classic fantasy settings, and just create an extremely compelling story out of it. And he very much does this in this book, which is all about a hero our main character, who hero is not the right word for this guy. Our main character, who he gets enrolled in a magical school effectively to fulfill a purpose on behalf of his patron, and it's a very Machiavellian book, to say the least. Like, this is the book you would get if Joe Abercrombie and Patrick Rothfuss sat down to create something. Essentially. So, absolute blast reading this book. I recently found out that it's the first of a quartet. So, if you want to dive into it right away to see what all the hype is about, I highly recommend it. If you want to wait a bit before for the other releases to come out before you take a chance on it, no problem. Either way, add this book to your TBR. It needs to be read. It's incredible. My next book is, I guess I'm doing this in order of the most recently that I read it. My next book is Vajra Chandrasekhar's incredible The Saint of Bright Doors. This book, this guy, he absolutely blew my mind with this book. This is all about a failed assassin who, not failed assassin, he was indoctrinated from very young to assassinate the figurehead of a religious movement who just so happens to be his father. And before being actually weaponized and sent out to perform the task, he escapes his rural village and he goes to live in the city of Laureate, a city that's just filled with the detritus of pretty much failed religious icons and sex. You have failed prophets, you have failed, you name it, it's in there. And this is just an incredibly weird, strange book, because that's just the backdrop. That's not even what this book is about. Like, this book is about this guy trying to live as mundane a life as possible after such a far out there kind of childhood. And of course, that's far off. That's not in the cards for him. And this book is just weird and creative and strange. This guy, he's the author, I think, that closest matches China Miéville's style in terms of what he does and how he does it with this book. So if you're a fan of Miéville, you definitely want to read this book. My next pick is actually a book that's going to be released soon. It's not out yet. I got an arc for this one, but it's P. Jelly Clark's The Dead Cattail Assassins. As always, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name, but this is an incredibly entertaining novella about an undead assassin who she accepts a contract, and then when she goes to fulfill it, she realizes that she's been set up. And in this world, once you accept a contract, it's all about your integrity, it's all about your honor. You have to fulfill it, or there are very much divine consequences to address. So she she pretty much has the entire guild on her back after that point, and it just becomes this race to unravel this mystery of who set her up, essentially. And an absolutely incredible book. The ending is probably one of the most satisfying endings of any book I've read in quite a while, for the simple example of how Clark decides to portray a particular character. And I am from the Caribbean, so I had an absolute blast with that portrayal. One of the most fun things I've read in a very, very long time. Definitely, and it's a novella. It's set in an all-new world with all-new characters you've never seen from him before. It was just a blast from start to finish. Definitely one to read. My fourth pick is Vaishnavi Patel's Goddess of the River, which is just this amazing mythic retelling of the events leading up to the Kurukshetra War, which is the conflict between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, two groups of basically cousins in Hindu mythology or history, however you want to look at it. And it's told from the perspective of one of the deities, Mother Ganga, or the goddess, the river Ganges, the anthropomorphication of the river Ganges, essentially. And it has a feminist bent, but what's incredible about this book is just so creative and spellbinding in the characterization. And on top of that, given that this is a book about gods and humans, there's no clear-cut good and evil person here. Everyone is a shade of grey. It's incredible. It's a wonderful book from start to finish. There is some content in here that I guess you could put trigger warnings for pretty early on, but it is what it is. An absolutely incredible book. This is the second book I've read from Vaishnavi Patel, her second released book, that just absolutely blew me away. And definitely needs to be read. If you're a fan of her novel Asya Keiki, you definitely want to check this one out. The next one, number 5 on my list, is the first self-published fantasy novel I've read in years, and it's the best self-published fantasy novel I've ever read, and it is Emma Wang's The Sword of Kaigan. This incredible story of essentially a rural military clan who serve they're the Sword of Kaigan. They're the first line of defense against invasion from a very powerful neighboring army, and it's just it's incredible pseudo-Japanese tale. The magic system, if you're a fan of Avatar The Last Airbender, the magic system pretty much channels that spirit, and it's just this absolutely incredible war story. What I love about this book is that often after the big climatic battle, things wrap up pretty quickly. We maybe get 1 or 2 chapters after that where things just all the threads essentially get wrapped up. That's not the case in this book. This book, it's structured very differently from a traditional as much as this is very much an incredible epic fantasy novel in one book, it's also structured in that we have essentially a Bildungsroman. It peaks in in one of the best action sequences I've read in a long time, and then the latter half of the book, which can make or break it for people, is a very human tale of the consequences of this conflict, and it's just an incredible story from start to finish. I had an absolute blast with it. This is the book that made me kind of rethink my stance on self-published fantasy novels. I've tried many of them in the past. I've been burned by a ton of them. This is the book that made me decide, okay, I'm going to give self-published fantasy novels another chance. And let's hope they continue to never let me down the way this one did. This one didn't. So yeah, incredible book. If you're considering reading it, absolutely check it out. At number 5 or 6, I lost track. Anyway, whichever number this is, it's Mark Lawrence's absolutely incredible The Book That Broke the World, his latest installment in the Library trilogy, which is his most creative trilogy to date, and it just picks up right where the Book That Wouldn't Burn left off, and it's all about our characters trying to find their way back after being separated and pushed into their own path. They're essentially trying to find their way back to the library to get back to to essentially meet her back with each other. Because one of the major threads that runs through the story is very much a romance story. This book just expands on everything. It shows us the background conflict that's going on within the library. It gives us a bit more of the history. It introduces new characters and new races that at first don't seem to contribute anything, and then they eventually reveal to play a pretty huge role in what's happening. It's just an amazing book, a really fun book from start to finish. Intricate, complex, it really sets you thinking. It really sets you thinking about information and how it's used and the pitfalls of it, and what knowledge can mean in the wrong hands and the right hands. Just like I every time I read this book and the previous book, I tend to kind of picture think of what Mark Lawrence has to say regarding the library, and just kind of extrapolate that onto the internet and think about how it's pretty fun. It's a fun book. It works on multiple levels, and absolutely worth to read. Like I said, it's his most creative, his most inventive trilogy to date, and absolutely not one to miss. I recently found out that the next book, the final book in the trilogy, is the book that held her heart, and I can't wait for that book. So moving on, I believe this would be number 7. It is Catherine Arden's The Warm Hands of Ghosts. It's like her Winter Night trilogy. This is her 4th novel release, by the way. Like her Winter Night trilogy, this is a historical fantasy, but it crosses the realm more into a magical realist tale. It's very much a story of World War One and just the depredations and the horrors and the travesties. Not just on a human level, but also on a social level that occurred. And at its core, it's a story of a nurse who sets out to find her missing brother, who he went missing on the front lines in Belgium. And it's just this incredible story from start to finish, absolutely enthralling. If you're a fan of that kind of story, a little more unique fancy, this is definitely not one to miss. In the end notes, she kind of mentioned, she took years to put this book together, and it shows in just how incredibly detailed and rich it is. Definitely one of the more fulfilling, one of the more entertaining novels released on this year, and I would not be surprised to see this book appear in quite a few awards next year. But moving on, at number 8 we have the prelude to Sebastien de Castell's latest series, and that is Crucible of Chaos. Now, it says this is a prelude to his new series, Court of Shadows, but honestly, I read this prelude, I read the first book in the Court of Shadows, and there's literally no connection between the two. Maybe something will come up later in the series, but for now, I consider this book very much a standalone if you want to take a look at it. Crucible of Chaos follows the pretty intense adventure of the King's Crucible, the Great Court, who he answers the call to go and arbitrate a dispute at a monastery. And what he finds instead is the monastery just torn asunder, the monks in a full state of civil war. And it's just this incredible story that unfolds, this incredible mystery with quite a bit of horrific elements to it. Absolutely brilliant. It's trademark Sebastien de Castell in just the egregiousness, the flamboyancy, the sword, the swashbuckling, the bombastic way of the main character. It peak Sebastien de Castell. This perfectly distilled in one incredible book. I had an absolute blast reading this from start to finish. I wish I could pronounce this guy's name. It's just so long and flagrant. You gotta read this book to think. Then there's a reason why I always refer to him as the King's Crucible. Like, that name is just, yeah. Anyway, absolutely worth checking out if you're a fan of Sebastien de Castell. If you're a fan of the whole sword and sorcery, swashbuckling kind of story. Couched in like an epic fantasy setting, because this is set in the world of his Great Coats books. Moving on, at number 9, I have Adrian Tchaikovsky's House of Open Wounds, which is the follow-up, the second book in his Tyrant Philosophers trilogy, and I just had an absolute blast with this one, way more than I did the first one. It's written in a very humorous style, and it follows the adventures of one of the characters from the first book when he's thrown into a hospital setting because it's believed that he has healing powers. He doesn't. And furthermore, his powers pretty much make anyone he heals or who is healed by his particular skill set pretty much incapable of ever participating in the war ever again. So what he's doing in the middle of a hospital and just the intrigue and the entertainment that follows is just absolute top notch. Tchaikovsky, I've started reading Tchaikovsky's fantasy fairly recently, and I've just had, with one exception, I've just had a blast with all of his books. This one the most. It just absolutely entertaining from start to finish. An absolute must read. Check it out. And then at number one, if I had to pick one single novel that I enjoyed more than any other this year, it has to be this one. And that is Simon Jimenez's The Spear Cuts Through Water. A book I am convinced is going to be considered a classic of this genre in the future. This is just, it's an absolutely intricately well written novel. It just does so much. There's everything in this book, everything you could want as a fantasy fan. There's fantasy, there's a mythic retelling, there's a fairy tale feel, there's grimdark, there's romance, there's that epic fantasy feel to it. There's hell, if you're a fan of cannibalism, you can find it in this book. Like it just has everything. It's incredibly portrayed, it's incredibly executed. It's a breathtaking novel from start to finish. I haven't read anything like it before. I probably will read a ton of it again because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of writers who scramble to pretty much copycat this, but there's no one who's going to execute a novel like this again on the level that Simon Jimenez does. Now, a bunch of people are going to tell you, check this out, you might like it, this, that, whatever. I firmly believe this is a novel you need to experience for yourself to find out if it works for you. And there's very few people who are going to be skilled enough to describe this novel in a way that perfectly captures everything it does. I doubt even Simon Jimenez could do it himself with with everything that his book does. Experience it for yourself is my recommendation. You may love it, you may hate it, it will be an experience. And yeah, those are my, I guess, 10 random picks from my best books of this year. The next video in the series will kind of cover my 10 series, which are completely different picks from this, by the way, FYI. So yeah, what do you think of this list? Have you read any of these? Are you interested in any of these? Drop something in the comments, let me know, and until next time, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching.